If you'll just go ahead and open them up to 1 Kings chapter 19, and then we'll take a look there in a few moments. It is great to be here. A couple of weeks ago, I visited a church, and we celebrated with them 30 years of their 30th anniversary. It was the first church that Jennifer and I ever planted, so we got to go back 30 years later. I started church planting when I was about 10 years old, and not just kidding. Then we get to come over a couple of weeks later. We get to come and be with you, a church, and see what you've done and what God has done here and how God has used Mike and your leadership. And I got to tell you something. Just you need to hear this. I want to applaud you with all the applause I can give you and your pastor, because today we live in an era where churches and pastors only stay married together for 3, at most 5 years. And you're going at 20 years. That's an incredible marriage. That's a God thing, and you need to recognize that. That means you must be a really good church. And Mike is a really good pastor. Right? Really is. It is great to be here. We were talking before the service. Mike said, "Man, Phil, I'm so glad you're here." And he said, "It's great to have you as a friend here." And I said, "I know. We're great friends." He said, you guys have been here 20 years, and this is the first time you've ever had me come back to speak, and I had to invite myself." We're great friends. Hey, it is good to have you. Hey, I brought something with me this morning. One of the things that I do, and I enjoy doing, I'm a sports officiator. That means I referee football games. I work with high school football and Pee Wee football, and I also do high school umpire. I umpire baseball and softball. So I enjoy that, and so I brought a little bit of my gear with me this morning, and I want to use it as an illustration. I was supposed to unzip this bag and get it out, but I want to show you something, and this is important gear. You got to have it. And what are they? What are these? They're shoes. You know, if you're depending on how old you are, some of you would call these tennis shoes. That kind of others call them sporting shoes. But these are shoes. They're very important for us sporting officials because we're doing a lot of running and up and down the fields. And at least I try to run and keep up with those guys. This summer, though, I was with my dad visiting at his property up in East Texas, and we were putting down some laminate flooring. Something I'm not really good at doing, but I was down on my knees, and I happened to be wearing these shoes, and I heard something pop. And I was thinking, well, at my age, what could that be? I stopped. I didn't move for a moment. I waited for the pain. I didn't feel any pain. So, well, that's kind of strange. So I stood up, and I felt something. And inside my shoe, it popped. The sole broke loose from the bottom of the shoe. Now, you couldn't see it, and in fact, if you were to come and look at it, you would say, well, that shoe looks pretty good to me. It doesn't look bad. But if you look really close, you'll see a small crack there. And what I didn't realize, running up and down the fields, I didn't know that my sole was weakening until I put just the right amount of pressure on it, and at that moment, it cracked. So that meant I had to go do what I hate to do, buy shoes. And, you know, because looking at them, they look great. On the bottom, they look good. On the top, they look good. Would try to keep polishing them up. But I kept these, and I put them in my closet. I said, I need to remind myself of these about my soul. And that's what I want to talk to us today about. I want to talk to us today in the Scripture about soul care. How to care for your soul. Because oftentimes in our own lives, I have discovered on my personal experience that our soul can get in trouble. We can be going along and life looks good on the outside. We look good. We're at church. We're reading our Bibles. We're carrying our Bibles. We're doing Bible study. We're having prayer time. We're doing those things. We may be serving in some ministry area. But even though everything is looking good on the outside, underneath where people can't see, our soul is beginning to crack. It's deteriorating. And sometimes we don't even know that. Now, you know how I know that? Because it wasn't long ago in my own life that I discovered that I had some cracks in my soul. I discovered that at a point of crisis, when I needed a strong soul, that my soul was much weaker than I thought. And I didn't even know it. And the result was I reacted out of a soul that was weak, deteriorating, and it was made some bad choices. And we can do that. And so I want us to look at a scripture today, and we're going to learn from the character, one of my favorite Bible characters, Elijah. Now, let me give you a little background on the story before we actually read the text this morning. Elijah was a guy we don't know much about in the Bible. We know that he was a Tishbite. He was from Tishbe. He came on the scene serving God. When we first see him, he's serving God. He's living for God. He's wholeheartedly preaching for God. He is all God's. He's all in. One of those kind of guys. I mean, he's not just a Sunday kind of guy. He's all in. There's no mediocrity about Elijah when it comes to serving God. He's all in. And he told King Ahab to gather 450 Baal prophets because the land had turned away from God. Elijah, by the way, had raised the dead. He had done miracles. And he tells Elijah, he said, it's time that this country make a choice. So we're going to prove it or settle it once and for all. Who is the real God here? The God that I serve or the God that you serve? So Ahab is instructed by Elijah to gather 450 of the Baal prophets and 400 of the Asherah prophets for a time to come together and to settle the issue of who is the real God to be worshipped. So the Baal and the Asherah gods were all gods of nature. Right? They were gods of nature. That's who they worshipped. And so Elijah says, I tell you what we'll do. We're going to have the showdown. We're going to have the battle. We're going to have the proof, not based upon something I picked, but we're going to do something that comes normal for your gods. We're going to use the battle relating to nature because your gods that you worship and serve are gods of nature. That's what you claim. So here's the challenge. Elijah says it's simple. You ask the God of nature, your gods of nature, to send fire from heaven, down out of heaven, and I want you to have them consume this bull on the altar. So these prophets built an altar. They put wood on it. They built it up with wood. They slay a bull. They laid the bull on it. And then they began praying that morning to their gods. They prayed that morning. By noontime, Elijah comes out. He looks around and he says, hey, the altar is still there. The bull is still there. No fires come down from heaven. And he starts, in football words, taunting the prophets. He says, where is your God? Did he take a lunch break? Did he sleep late this morning? Is he tired? Is he distracted? Is he out on a break? And he's taunting these guys. And they continue to pray to their gods of Baal and Asherah all day and to the point that they're exhausted. And they finally give up out of exhaustion and discouragement. And Elijah says, okay, you didn't get him to come, so here's what I want you to do. Step aside. It's my turn. He had them build an altar to God. Place a bull on it. Then he had them dig a ditch around the altar, and they took jars, filled it with water at Elijah's instruction, and they saturated that altar not once, but 3 times. They poured so much water on the altar, it was so saturated, so wet, that the water fell off and fell into the ditch around the altar. Now, what was Elijah saying? He's saying, hey, I don't want to just do something easy. I want to make it hard. I want it saturated. And then Elijah began to pray. And as he prayed to God, God sent fire from heaven, consumed the altar, and dried up every drop of water in the ditch surrounding the altar. The people then recognized that the God of Elijah was the one true God, and Elijah had the prophets, the Baal prophets, then taken away, and he had them all slaughtered, 450 Baal prophets slaughtered. Now that's where we pick up. That's the background of the story that we pick up here. 1 Kings chapter 19, begin in verse 1. Ahab told Jezebel, that's King Ahab's wife, all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. And then Elijah was afraid, and he rose, and he ran for his life. And he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. He had a partner with him, and he left his servant there. In verse 4, it says, but he himself went out a day's journey into the wilderness. He was alone, and he came and he sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, God, it is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down and he slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him, and he said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at the head a cake baked on his hot stones in a jar of water. So he ate, and he drank, and he lay down again. And then the angel of the Lord came again a second time, and he touched him, and he said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose, and he ate, and he drank, and he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. Now look in verse 9. And there he came to a cave, lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Now I want to share with you 3 things this morning that we can learn from this text about caring for our soul. Because all of us need to be caring for our souls. Because if not, you'll be like my shoes. You'll be wearing them one day and they look great, they feel great, and all of a sudden inside you discover there's a weakness and they become dislodged, there's cracked. Here's the first thing I want to encourage you to write this down. Serving God does not insulate us from difficult times. Have you ever heard guys say, and maybe from time to time you hear people say, well, if you come to know Christ, if you give your life to Christ, everything is going to be great. Finances are going to be good. Family's going to be good. Teenagers are going to be great. That husband's going to be awesome. That wife is fat. Everything is fixed. Now, if you're from some other part of the world, we say fixed for everything here in Houston, right? Everything is fixed. And people believe that. I want you to understand, this scripture teaches us, as Elijah came on the scene serving God, he was living and he was preaching a message of God. And it was when Elijah was serving God and he was close to him that he faced difficulty. When we come to know God, I want you to understand, we're not insulated from troubles. We're not insulated from challenges in our life. We're not insulated from difficulties in our life. They're going to come. Some of them are going to come just because that's circumstances of life. Some of them are going to come because someone wants to do harm to us. That happens. And that was the case of Elijah. Realize that when serving God, it may be one of the most vulnerable times of our lives. Because when we're serving God and we're testifying of God and making God famous, that's when the enemy, the evil one, wants to distract us, wants to defeat us, wants to get us away. Why? Because he wants to destroy the reputation of God. You see, we are so vulnerable after spiritual high points. When you experience an extremely high point in God, maybe you go to a retreat or Mike preaches a message one day and God just touches you and you feel it from the toes to your head and you just know, boy, that was a God moment, or he uses you to introduce someone to faith in Jesus Christ, or he performs some kind of miracle in your life and you're just walking on high in that mountaintop experience, as we like to say in the church world. Understand, that is a time of vulnerability. You see, Elijah was having awesome moments. He had raised the dead. He was doing miracles in the name of God, and God was being made famous. He had called fire down from heaven. Hey, when's the last time you prayed and fire came down from heaven? I haven't had that happen. And if that did happen, I would be walking around and telling you about it. Hey, let me tell you about my prayer life. Elijah was there, and that is the place where Elijah was the most vulnerable. He was experiencing God, and he was experiencing his miracle and his power in his life. And that is when we become so vulnerable to God. We also become vulnerable to God when we are vulnerable to attacks, when we're physically tired and our emotional tank is low. That's a point of vulnerability. When was it that Satan tempted and made his move on Jesus? It was at the end of 40 days of fasting. It was at the end of a 40-day fasting period when Jesus was tired, he was hungry, but it was also a time when he had spent intimacy with God alone. And it was at that high point in his life and at that physical, emotional point in his life that he was attacked. And that's when Satan went after him. You know, I saw a report that came out this past week that said that today, one of the greatest dangers of automobile accidents today that's actually surpassing alcohol-caused accidents is tiredness. They said that they're reporting somewhere about 1 million accidents that will occur this year just based upon us being tired while we're driving. Now, can you relate to that? And they even asked the question, they said they did some surveys about how many of you have ever fallen asleep or dozed when you were driving? Be honest with me. Yeah, be honest. Okay. So it's not all texting that makes you swerve, right? Yeah, we get tired. And I was watching that report, I said, that is staggering to me to see that our culture is so fast-paced, so moving so often that we get tired, that we fall asleep while we're driving. And I thought, but isn't that true? We live lives that are always on the run, always on the go. We try to be good employees. We try by giving our best. We get there early. We stay late. We give them what we've got. We work all the time, over the weekend sometimes. We try to serve the church. We try to give our best to God. We try to run our kids to all the practices and all the meetings that they have, and we keep up with all our social networking that's always on the move. We live life at a pace today that our society is depleted physically and emotionally. You can be so busy doing God's work even that you don't even realize when your soul's becoming dry and parched. And many godly people have souls that are eroding, and they don't know it, and they need proper soul care. And I want you to understand, if you're one of those people right now, if you would say, well, Phil, I know I look good on the outside, but on the inside I know my soul is dry and parched. You're in good company. You're in good company. Because Elijah was one of those guys. Elijah was one whose soul was being depleted. Was he a bad guy? No. Was he a immoral guy? No, he was a guy serving God. He was all in for God, and yet his soul had a weak point. Listen, you don't have to be a guy that's doing all the immoral choices to be a guy that has a soul that shrivels up. Not long ago, sometimes this summer, I posted something on Facebook about something that had touched my heart. And I had been to some homes around the Houston area, and I saw poverty that I just did not know existed. And I saw a depravity of man. I didn't know. I was amazed. And so I just posted on Facebook how God had spoken to my heart that day about how blessed I am and that I should just thank God for what I do have rather than complaining about what I don't have. And I talked about the need of man, the depravity of man that I see right here in the shadows of incredible wealth in our community. So it wasn't long after that I got a little ding and said somebody replied to my post, and so I looked at it, and this lady just ripped me apart and told me how calloused I was, because there are people worse off in this world than what I had seen, and there are people in Guatemala and other parts of the world that are worse off, and why am I talking about how needy people are here? And it just went on to just tell me how unspiritual I am and how far from God I am and how blind I am to not real needy people. Well, I did what everybody does when they get a Facebook response. I typed my reply back quickly. You do that? Now, here's what I did do, and I'm so glad. I didn't send it. I typed it out, though, and I said, take that. It was not a slap. It was a punch to the nose. I was not going to leave a fingerprint. I wanted to leave a fist print, broken nose. I was mad. I know I'm not very spiritual. She told me that. And I figured if I'm not, then why not, right? I didn't send it. I deleted it. And then I began to pray, and I spent the whole day wrestling with it. And here's what I concluded. You see, that issue wasn't her issue. The reason I got angry, that was my issue. Because what it revealed to me was it was a sign that my soul was weak because the words of another person devastated me so greatly. And I realized that's a sign that I need soul care. And I began to pray and say, God, I don't want to be anything that she's accusing me to be, but if I am that, help me get it right. Because what others say to me shouldn't determine the joy that my heart experiences in what I feel. And so when words of other people are more important than what God says about us, that's a sign that we need soul care. Because my identity, my person was attacked, and I was trusting more in her words than what God said about me. A sign that I needed soul care. So understand, a follower of Christ does not insulate you from difficult times. Second thing we learn as we move here, often our reaction to difficult times or to attacks is to try to do what? We run away, don't we? I mean, when somebody comes to us, what do? We typically want to run away. None of us, or very few of us, like to go looking for fights. I mean, there's a few people like that, but most of us want to run away. We want to avoid the conflict. Elijah, after an incredible spiritual experience, did what most of us all do when we get attacked. He ran from Jezebel. Now think about this. He had raised the dead. He had prayed fire down from heaven. He had 450 prophets killed, and yet one woman threatened him, and he ran. Now, some of you guys aren't moving, and you're saying, yeah, but you don't know my wife either. And I know you can't say anything, right? Now think about that. You have power. Your prayer is so strong that fire comes from heaven, that you touch a dead one and he comes to life. Your prayer life is that powerful, and God is using you and working through you, and one woman says, I'm going to kill you, and you run? Now, what does that tell us? That tells us Elijah was at a place where his soul needed some care. The Bible indicates that he had pulled away. When he took off running, he pulled away from his servant to be left alone, and he went a day's journey by himself. Isn't that what we do? We, just like Elijah, when the conflict comes, when the difficulty comes, we try to run away. We pull away from our friends. Elijah pulled away from his friend. He went off to a place by himself so he could pray alone by himself. He began to feel sorry for himself, and he prayed this prayer, God, just kill me, take my life. You ever prayed that prayer? I have. I've been hurt to the place that I wanted to pull away from everyone. I said, I don't know who to trust. I don't know who to be around. I just want to be by myself. And I've prayed, God, just take me. And oftentimes we will find ourselves, when people get hurt and attacked, rather than staying close, we pull away. Just like Elijah did. Now, Elijah wasn't a bad guy. He's doing what most of all of us do. But before we call Elijah a coward, we need to examine our own hearts. Isn't it true for us that when we are attacked or hurt, that we often do the same thing? We run. We build walls around us so others can't get close enough to hurt us. We withdraw from those in the church, and we withdraw from people in the church. You know, most of the people that I have met who were followers of Christ who don't attend church today, they don't attend because they once, who were dedicated followers, got wounded in some way. And so they just left God and they left the church. It wasn't because they intended to. They just said, hey, I got wounded. I want to pull away. And they pull away just like Elijah did. So often our reaction is to try to run away, and that's what Elijah did. But let's get to really the solution here. God gives us a model to follow in caring for our soul. Here's what it is. He says, first of all, rest and refresh. Elijah was told to take a nap. You're sitting down, you take a nap, he wakes up and he eats. The angel there, God had him provide him something to eat, and then he says, take another nap, get up and eat again. Take care of your body and your emotions. Learn to develop habits and rhythms in your life. You know what one of the things that God established in the Old Testament for rest and refreshing? What's it called? It's called the Sabbath. It's a principle of the Sabbath, and we need to develop that. God knew it when he built and created this world. What did he do after 6 days? He did what? He rested. He refreshed. And don't you think if God feels the need to rest and refresh, and he's the creator of this all, don't you think we need to as well? So some of you are saying, so what are you saying, Phil? That after church today I should go home and take a nap? Yes, I am giving you permission to take a nap. Absolutely. No guilt. Don't worry about the lawn. Hey, don't worry about the windows. Don't worry about the dishes. Go take a nap. Some of you, the most spiritual thing you could do this week is to take a nap and rest. That'd be one of the most spiritual things that some of you could do this week. Let me ask you, do you take time to rest your body? Do you take time to rest your emotions? When you're serving God, even in great moments, you need to be careful to set a time aside to rest and refresh. Several years back, I began to ask God, I said, I asked the question, how is it, God, that so many great men serve you and seem to stay the course? I began to look around at our city at some incredible pastors and leaders, and I looked around at our country, and I began to ask some questions and probe into that. And one of the things that seemed to be common among every one of those guys, I discovered that every one of them had sabbaticals. Every one of them had a sabbatical. And almost every one of them took off at least 4 weeks during the summer. Many of them, the majority, took off the whole summer from preaching at their church. And I looked at that and I began, this was several years ago, and I went to our leadership and I said, I not putting my level at them, but I think I need that break. So I took a sabbatical, and I began to take time off every summer, at least 6 Sundays where I didn't preach. Because you know what happened last night? Did you watch the football game last night, Mike? I'm sorry, John. I was yelling for the Rebels, okay? Yeah. I'm from Mississippi, so I'm an Ole Miss guy, right? But last night, Mike was able to watch that game, and guess what? He did not care about the sermon today. Now, he might have been a little bit worried that it was me that was coming. But other than that, Mike rested better last night knowing that he didn't have to speak this morning than probably any Saturday night he's rested in a while. Just knowing you don't have to preach. There is incredible weight upon the preparation and the praying. It is a mental, physical, and spiritual anguish that he goes through every Saturday. Every Saturday. Now, he hadn't told me that. So I don't know. I have not asked Mike this question, so I don't know. And you may already be doing this. It's a great marriage you guys have here. But if Mike doesn't have a sabbatical, and if you don't send him away at least 6 or 8 weeks every year, you ought to, for your sake and for his sake. Now, I intentionally didn't ask Mike if he had a sabbatical or not, so I could say that, and he didn't have an influence on me. So if he doesn't take a sabbatical, if he doesn't take 4 to 8 weeks off every year, somewhere in that frame, you need to set aside the time. You say, well, I got to pay somebody to come speak. It's the best money you'll spend that year. Give him time. Same as you. You can't do it just once a year. Develop rhythms weekly. That's what God did, right? Old Testament commandment. Honor the Sabbath. Develop daily rest periods. Rest and refresh. Second thing, Get back to hearing God's voice. In verse 11 and 13 it says, and he said, go out, God says, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore the mountain, and he broke it in pieces like in the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face, his cloak, in his cloak, and he went out, and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him, and he said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah was so intimate with God that he heard God's whisper. He did not need the spectacular or the spiritual show. He knew the gentle voice of God. When God whispers, do you hear it? Do you recognize his voice? How often do you spend with him reading his word? Is the Bible a regular diet in your life, or is it something that you use once a week or on occasion? Make it a part of your daily life. That's where God is going to be speaking through you, to you the most. The more you spend with him, the better you recognize his voice. And it doesn't have to be hours at a time. Simply make it 10 minutes, 1, 2, or 3 times a day. It's the small, frequent meals that are the healthy meals. Next thing is connect with other believers. The latter part of chapter 19 tells us that God had Elijah go and connect with a man named Elisha. And they partnered in ministry together and in friendship. Connect with someone who desires to walk with God. We are not to be loners. Even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. Get in a small group like they talked about earlier. Did you hear what John said? A difficult time in his life. And what happened? People that he was in relationship with supported him, connected with him, walked with him through it. You never know when you may be the one that needs the person the support. The next time it may not be John, but it may be John loving on you. We just never know. Then get back on your journey with God. Get back on your journey with God. Elijah got off track from his journey with God. He ran and he had to spend time getting his soul healthy. And one of the things that will help you heal is to begin serving God again. Serve God by serving others. I know it's scary. I know it's risky. I know you maybe have never done it before, but try it. And yes, you could get hurt again. But you got to keep doing it. Get back on the journey. Years ago, my daughter and I, we moved out to, my family, we moved out into a subdivision out in Huffman, and it's an equestrian community, and we moved out there, and we got horses. So my oldest daughter, Rachel, was at school, and we were in high school, so we got horses together, and she got this young horse, and we went and picked out this little 2-year-old horse, and I don't know if you know much about horses or not. The more I learn, the less I realize I know. And so we're breaking a horse. This cowboy that went with me to pick out this horse said, have you ever broke a horse before? And I said, no. And he said, are you sure you can do that? And I said, well, I can read. I said, I have a master's degree. That's what I told that cowboy. I was so stupid. He said, okay. So I watched these DVDs. I'd watch how to break a horse, and I'd go out there and we'd do it. So we got Rachel, and we got in this round pen, and I put her on the horse. You say, why did you put your daughter on the horse instead of you? Because she's younger. She rides him, and there's a point when you're breaking a horse that they'll all buck a little bit, right? They'll trot and they'll walk, but when you go into a lope, they're always going to buck a little bit. That's just what they're going to do. That transition's rough. So she does it. The horse's name is Awesome. He bucks, she hits the ground. My heart stopped. She's laying there on the ground right in front of me is where she hit the ground. I'm just frozen. She's not moving, and then she looks down, she picks her leg up, and she looks at her knee. And her jeans were torn all on her knee. No blood, just her jeans were torn. She saw that her jeans were torn, and she started bawling. I said, Rachel, are you okay? Yes, sir, Daddy, but my jeans are torn. And she starts just crying because her blue jeans are torn. And I started laughing at that point. So I got her up. I said, Rachel, you know what you got to do? Yes, sir. I said, okay, I know you're scared, but you got to do it. What'd she have to do? Get back on. She got back on Awesome. They went through the same thing. He didn't buck that next time. Now, was it for his sake or hers? It was for hers. She had to get back in the saddle. You see, not every time when you get back in the journey with God, not everybody's going to hurt you. Not everybody's going to kick you. It's not always going to be painful. But on occasion it is. You got to get back in the saddle. Now she rides the horse and does a great job. What about your soul today? Do you look good to all of us, but you know your soul is parched and dry? You're not a horrible person. You're in good company. Elijah was a great man of God, but he needed soul care. Would you stand? You see, when we stand, that gives us the position to act on and make a decision. So I'm going to lead us in a prayer this morning, and I'm going to ask you to make a decision this morning. I'm going to ask you to come to God and experience His grace and mercy if your soul is parched and dry. I'm going to ask you to stop running and recognize some danger signs in your own life. And then I'm going to ask you to begin to do what you need to do to get your soul back in a healthy place. Let's pray. Father, I don't know what individuals are struggling with. I don't know where their soul is cracked or it's drying up. Some maybe are not even aware of it. I pray that your Spirit would bring that awareness to their heart today. And for those that are looking good on the outside, putting on a good show for us all, yet they're hurting inside, God, let them to be honest with you, with themselves, and with others. In the story of Elijah, you give us a plan, a process of the things that we need to do to make our soul healthy. And I pray for that this morning, that whatever the individuals need to do in their life, maybe it's to start resting, maybe it's to connect with others, maybe it's to get back in the saddle on the journey with God. I don't know. Help them make that today. And I pray that in your name, Jesus. Amen.